have a lot of respect for farm families who can do that. I just
Pig Sweet is located. Like we have a Pig Sweet. I guess it's a shop of some sort. They have like their tractors and other agricultural machines there. Like it's a pig, and it's like a mile down from my road. And so if you time it just right, you'll get stuck behind one of their tractors, taking up the entire road. I'm like,
why couldn't you pull up behind me?
It's like Pig Sweet, like I swear, like it's a mile from my house. I'm like, oh,
okay, well,
surrounded.
That's a tad rarer here.
Floods are always fun because the Mississippi River is right there.
Well, yeah.
I mean, but I live on a mountain, so I'm okay. Like, my house sits on a big hill, and the driveway is like right like this.
Oh, okay.
So we're good. Yeah. Now, if a tornado comes and gets us, then we're like maybe in trouble.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, there's nowhere safe in Tennessee from tornadoes. It makes me pretty paranoid, actually, but I'm not going to think about that right now. All right, so it's 2:41. Still waiting on a couple people.
Watch them be in the classroom. Like,
this is why I sent a reminder email out this morning.
Just the polar opposite of last week, basically.
Yes, right. You know, but I mean, I sent an email last week, right? Telling everybody.
Yeah.
And then I sent a reminder. Yeah. So y'all have no excuse. Although I know that people just like kind of forget just because everyone's lives are busy and we pretty much are just like one day at a time. Okay, what do I have to remember for today? But yeah, actually, it turns out I'm glad that we're doing this via Zoom because if the weather's really, really bad later this afternoon, I hate the thought of people having to drive home in that. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get started because we might be able to get out early today. And of course, early is we're gonna have bad weather no matter when we get out, but because it's supposed to start again, I believe, sometime during this class period. But anyway, yeah, I pretty much kept everybody every single minute of class last week, and so I think I could probably let y'all out a little earlier today. We're gonna get through our conversation about object biographies and the two articles that you all had to read for today. So any questions, announcements, fun stories anyone needs to start off with?
I have an announcement.
Yes, Abby.
I did not read the readings this week because I had lesson plans and interviews to go to. So,
well, that's very brave of you to admit that at the beginning of class. I appreciate your honesty. I pretty much assume that somebody on every given week has not done the readings. It doesn't mean I approve of that, but it's everyone's lives get busy at different points, and I just know that's going to be a thing. So don't be afraid to ask questions, even people who read the articles, but maybe were a little bit unclear about them or maybe forgot a lot of what was in them. I know that like when I was in college, I was always afraid to ask questions because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to ask the question that was answered in the 2 pages that I didn't get around to reading, and then I'll look like a dumbass. I won't think you're a dumbass, people, if you ask questions. Just go ahead. I mean, everyone else probably has the same question and is waiting for somebody to be brave enough to ask it. So that's totally fine with me. And I am going to try to go through the main points of each of these 2 articles. So obviously I'd like for you all to be discussing them with me and not just letting me summarize them for you. But, you know, like I said, some people actually do all the readings and still don't quite know how to articulate their reactions to it in class. So it is what it is. We'll get through it together.
Did have a question. When do you think our second essay will be graded by, or like?
Well, that's going to be answered in just a few seconds.
Okay.
because I had to put it on a PowerPoint slide to remind myself to tell y'all that they're already graded, and I scanned them all so that I can email them to you, since I'm not handing them back to you in person. So you'll be getting that email from me probably sometime tomorrow, latest by the end of this week. And if you haven't heard from me by Friday, then email me and be like, where's my essay? It's just like, I want to do it tomorrow morning, but I have a big fat meeting followed by a dental appointment, and they might not all get out, you know, by the time I'm done at the dentist, at which point my daughter will walk through the door and all bets are off as to whether I can maintain my train of thought. But anyway, hopefully tomorrow. Does that answer your question, Xander?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, I can see Noah, Xander, and Abby. I'm assuming that Behi, Kelsey, and Seth are listening in as well. Glad you're here. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, turn on if you can. It makes it a little bit easier for me to ask you guys questions if I can see I'm talking to people. Okay. Coffee achieved. All right. So in that case, I do have a PowerPoint just to make sure that I cover like some basic stuff. So I might be like bouncing back and forth because when the PowerPoint is on, I can only see like a couple of you guys in the tiles on the side. And so I might switch back to this grid when I want to have a bit more of a face-to-face discussion. So just hang on with me during that. Okay, so we're going to talk about object biographies. Trying to open the slideshow. Okay, so can everyone see this as a first slide? Okay, all right then. Now this is something that we have already been talking about this type of thing, just not by, you know, using technical vocabulary. And we will continue to talk about the whole idea about the life cycle and the biography of an object. But we're just going to get into some of the nitty gritty so that you guys can use this kind of structure and kind of to shore up your analyses moving forward. So here are the announcements. There we go, Xander. I will be emailing you your scanned and graded essays number 2 by the end of this week. But they are done. They're all recorded and everything. It's just I have to now email them to you. Okay, essay number 3 is now due on March 31st, because remember I had to push back essay 2 because of Snowmageddon week. And so essay number 3, according to the original version of the course readings, was due today, but luckily nobody actually believed that anymore. And so that'll be due in 2 weeks, which means next week you'll be getting the prompt for that. And then, but for next week, you'll have a D2L discussion prompt to go with the reading. You have one reading for next week. It's a chapter from the History from Things book. It's by Stephen Lubar and it's called Machine Politics. And we're going to be talking about the theme of agency, which basically is something that has the ability to do something has agency. So objects can do things and not just passively be things. And this is something that we've talked about before. What do objects make you do? And how do objects kind of perpetuate themselves? And it's a really very fruitful theme when you're talking especially about technological objects. So we'll be talking about technology and that kind of stuff. So you'll have a D2L discussion prompt. It's not there yet. I'm going to put that up by the end of this week. So just make sure you answer by next Wednesday the prompt. It'll go along with the readings. So And then we'll be meeting in person next week in Pac Hall 220 as normal. We're gonna have 2 more Zoom classes later this semester because we're gonna have guest speakers. So I will try to be letting y'all know on a weekly basis because I need to stay on top of this just as much as y'all do. Actually, more. I need to be on top of it more than you, obviously. Okay, so this week in Matt Cult on social media, I saw a couple things that were just too good to not share. And of course, once I start clicking on and pausing on these types of things in my Facebook feed, Facebook algorithms find a whole bunch more and keep throwing them at me. So I get more and more and more of these. So anyway, they just keep getting cooler. So here's one that I just saw today. It goes along with Monday's Ides of March celebrations or commemorations, depending on your point of view. A pencil holder where you can stab Caesar in the back.
That's awesome.
This
I want that for my classroom when I'm
Very
teaching.
clever. I like this a lot.
I want it.
well, there you go. Go to yoursfriday.com. All right.
Mhm.
I have not yet put this PowerPoint into D2L. I'm going to do that right after class is over today. And then I'll be, it takes a while for, oh shit. Hold on. I got to stop sharing for just a second. Okay, I am automatically recording. Okay, I did set it up to automatically record. Yay. So yeah, after I turn off the recording button, it takes a long time for it to get into whatever format it needs for me to download. And so I'll be uploading this at some point tomorrow or Friday to the YouTube page and emailing you all the link to that. Okay, back to what it was we were looking at. Okay, so the second thing that I just had to share. This is a Volkswagen Beetle covered in more than 2 million glass beads by 8 traditional huichol artisans who worked on it for 8 months. So this is Mexican folk art on a Volkswagen. There you go, everybody. You're welcome. And if you all find anything cool like this to share over the course of the next week, you can send it to me beforehand and I'll be happy to work it into my PowerPoint, or just bring it to class and we'll ooh and ah over it then. All right. Okay, so to start off with the idea of object biography, I'm going to show you a movie trailer where the whole movie is one giant object biography. And the movie is called The Red Violin. This is a movie that came out in the 90s. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but it's pretty good. So I actually have to stop sharing that screen and start sharing my Google screen to show you. And I actually, excuse me for a second. I have to pause the record.
Because of the Victorian era, or maybe it was in America.
There was, let's see, Jason Fleming plays this kind of virtuoso violinist who's also a rake, whose lover is the one who grabs the gun and shoots him, or shoots somebody when she sees that he's having an affair. But anyway, so yes, so it's in his hands in like the 19th century, and that's, I think, in England. And then of course we see it very much at an auction house in the late 20th century. And I hope that you all at least recognize Samuel L. Jackson. I don't think he drops the F-bomb once in this movie. So it's worth seeing for that, if nothing else. And so you could see it. So in most of its life, it's being treated as a valuable instrument, right? People are playing it, they're protecting it, they're passing it down in their families. But then, of course, in the context of an auction house, what role does the violin take on then? You know, then we get into the point where it's a commodity as well as a collector's item. And this is one of the things that's actually brought up in the Kopytov article, where when you get something that is possessed of such a singularity that it is so valuable, it's hard to put a price on it, but you have to put a price on it to prove just how valuable it is. So it's this weird kind of, you know, paradox, because you could hear in the crescendo of the trailer that the bidding was getting past $2 million. And of course, the real thing is, you know, who ends up with it, because representatives from all the different main stages of its life are actually bidding on it. So like, you know, it was housed in a monastery at one point. So the modern community from that monastery was bidding on it. The family of the Chinese woman who had had it during the revolution was bidding on it. A very famous collector and very, you know, virtuoso violinist was bidding on it. And, you know, so if you like that kind of thing, and it's a beautiful soundtrack, by the way, and I'm sure that there are a lot of other movies that are also good examples of object biographies. It's just this one always really stuck in my head because the object itself is so compelling that not only is it just an amazing object in terms of its physical properties, you know, it's got the best acoustics of just about any musical instrument that technician guy has tested. But it also is imbued with this mystical property too, born out of the, you know, the wife and child die, but the violin is born. It kind of has this power over every single person that it comes into contact with and drives them to certain actions that they may not have done before. So it's interesting interplay between, well, how much agency does this object have? How much power does the object have? What does it mean to all these different people? Is it a connection to their family? Is it a power status thing? You know, is it an identity thing? So it really embodies a lot of the things we've been talking about. So yeah, that's just, I'm going to talk about another case example kind of closer to the end of class, but I like to start off with this one. And yeah, I guess it has been a while. It's 1998. Yeah, okay, apparently it came out in 98. That's not even, well, it feels like that wasn't that long ago to me, but I guess it was, right? That's like now 23 years.
22. Thank you.
Oh, right. Were you like born in 1990?
20. Yeah, I'm 98.
All right, that's when I graduated from college. Anyway, so okay, so that's kind of an example. So who wants to kind of define or start contributing to a class definition of what an object biography would be?
I guess kind of like where it's been, who's used it, what they used it for, the time that they had it. It's, I guess, journey through owners.
Good.
Try to find its origin.
All those things. Anyone want to add?
I mean, this might be going ahead a little bit, but there was also spheres of exchange, I believe they talked about, and the like TIV specifically.
Yes.
How there's like different tiers, like there's subsistence items, then there's prestige items and rights, if I'm correct. So like offspring. Yeah.
Right. He's talking about the way that that society differentiates its system of exchange
And like values
in terms of a hierarchy of values. All right. So yeah, where an object fits into a hierarchy of values, of course, is going to be different for every cultural system. but it is going to be part of its object biography. And then, of course, things that are discussed in the Karen Daniel article about life cycles is production, distribution, and consumption, right? The three things that basically all goods and commodities go through. You know, something is made, something gets from its maker to its user, and then it's used by a user, to put it extremely vaguely, because there are lots of different ways in which this happens. It could be like, my kid made me a drawing and now it's on the fridge, versus my computer was made from parts and distributed through Amazon, you know, like that kind of thing. So those three steps pretty much cover everything. All right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so here are some basic questions that belong to, you know, that kind of govern object biographies according to Kopytov. And so when I say Kopytov, I'm referring to that first of the two articles that I listed, The Cultural Biography of Things. And this article is from this anthology called The Social Life of Things. And so it's actually Commodities and Cultural Perspective. So it's really focusing on things as commodities, and we'll get to commodities in a second, but it came out in 1986. So this scholarship is still really good, but it's a little dated now. But Kopytov continues to be kind of a seminal person in this field, and you can tell that because Karen Daniel, in her article about object biographies, specifically references him as someone to be referenced in this debate. And she, when she talks about his method of analysis, she's talking about objects as commodities or potential commodities at many stages in their lives. But she says his limitation is that he's treating everything in terms of exchange and commoditization. And she's trying to look for like broader contexts and things like that. So anyway, it's probably better to read the Kopytov first. And I try to put these on your course meeting schedule in order that I think you should read them in, but I did it the other way around when I was rereading them this morning for my own purposes. But anyway, okay, so where does it come from and who made it? So here we're talking about production, right? And think of this, you know, people have biographies. How do you begin a biography of a person? Where they were born, where they came from, who their family was. So it's the same idea, just take the person out and put a thing in there instead. So what has been its career so far? Yes, objects have careers. And what do people consider to be an ideal career for such things? So in other words, the ideal career for a virtuoso violin is for it to be very expensive and to be used by very, very good violinists, right? And if it ends up accidentally getting like lost in some sort of storage unit in the back of some symphony hall somewhere, forgotten, that's not a really ideal career for it, right? I'm picturing the vault where the Ark of the Covenant is, and all those things, just not ideal career. So what are the recognized ages or periods in the thing's life? And you notice that those things are in scare quotes. This is ripped directly from Kopytov. I'm not paraphrasing here at all. So this is what he does. Because ages in life are words that we use to refer to people. But again, think about this, take the people out, put an object in. You can do the same approach. And what are the cultural markers for them? So the different periods in that violin's life would be, okay, when it was born, right, when it was made. And then of course, because the man went into such mourning after his wife died, you know, it ends up not how it would have ended up if his wife had lived and baby been fine and all that kind of stuff. So it ends up as a monastery, and then, you know, it's life there. So the movie's kind of divided into these different periods of this violin's life, where there's a lot of between times where we're not really sure how it got from one place to another. Like apparently there's like some sort of Roma caravan that transports it from Italy or Germany or wherever it was. That's how it got to England, I guess. So I don't remember how it got to China, you know, and I don't remember how it got from China to wherever its next stage was. But it, you know, these things, they're very kind of very clearly marked off in the movie. And I guess if you talk about, well, what do you mean cultural markers for different periods of life? You know, that could mean maybe an object spends part of its life on a store shelf with a price tag on it, and then it spends part of its life as a someone's personal belonging in their home, that it's been personalized with stickers, or, you know, let's say it's a laptop, all your stuff is on it, that kind of thing. And then if it's resold or handed down, there might be differences made to it at that time. So whatever distinguishes it as it enters a different phase of use. And then how does the thing's use change with its age? And what happens when it reaches the end of its usefulness? So this is actually a question that most of you all have tackled before as a parent in your essays that I just graded. Because for instance, you know, Xander, I'm just gonna mention that he wrote on the ruby slippers that Judy Garland wears in The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So those are movie props, but then they're cultural icons, and now they're in the Smithsonian. Kelsey also wrote an essay about something in the Smithsonian, the ginormous flag that inspired the Star-Spangled Banner in the War of 1812. And so a lot of things that we know about, we know because they're in a different context, a context like a museum, and not because of their original context. So the use and the cultural meanings of those things change over time, and a lot of you all already had to document that. And in a way, you have to think, well, sometimes that has to happen for most of the public to even know about them in the first place, because, you know, a lot of these things do end up in museums. There's a reason why a lot of you all picked things that are in museums. Although, Behi, did you say that your object, nobody knows where it is anymore?
Yeah, the original one.
Yeah, that weirded me out. It was like this weird listening device from the Cold War, called The Thing, and you really can't get creepier than that. But then, you know, a lot of you also chose kind of everyday objects that you might use the way they were intended to be used, like consumer goods, or you might not, like the way that Abby, you don't use your mason jar as a mason jar, you use it as a vase. And that a lot of these things end up, you know, the Noah talked about Civil War bullets, and your connection to them brings up for you more your connection to your grandmother who ran an antique shop than it does, you know, oh, I went out metal detecting and I found this, and you know, blah blah blah. So it's like the meanings change, and I think you all have a sense of that. And now I want you to think about this as part of this kind of, you know, putting it into an object biography. So yes. Okay, so let's talk about what a commodity is, because this is something that is very much part of the Kopitov reading. And we do live in a society where most of our objects are acquired because we buy them or we get them from people who bought them. And so we do very much live in a society where objects are commoditized, and that is the main form of exchange. So let's talk about what a commodity is. And this is, I do have a definition, but of course, as usual, I want to put it out to the group as a whole, how you might define what a commodity is.
I feel like it's just something that people can or want to buy. Is that too simple? Is that too basic?
No, that's the perfect place to start. Because yes, it is something that is like the purpose for it in its creation is, well, not necessarily even the purpose, but at some point in its life, it becomes exchangeable. But not just exchangeable. So a thing that has use value being a technical term here that you all should remember, and that can be exchanged in a discrete transaction for a counterpart. And the counterpart that we mostly use is money, right? Whether cash or credit, that's the counterpart that we tend to use in our society. Not always, though, but anyway, the very fact of the exchange indicating that the counterpart has in the immediate context an equivalent value. So in other words, when you go to the store and you see how much something costs, you make a calculation of whether or not you think it's worth that amount, and then you decide based on your calculation whether you're going to buy it. And of course, you weigh many things when you get through that. But we do live in this, you have to have some sort of cultural understanding that, okay, this is a reasonable price to put on it. And then you have a personal kind of conversation after that, whether I, as an individual, am going to shell out this amount for this object. So sometimes your personal thoughts on equivalent values might be very different from cultural thoughts on equivalent value. But so how many of you have bought something or acquired something that you've actually bartered for, where the counterpart has not been money? Abby?
So like when I went to Italy, they have lots of vendors out there who, like, you know, their main purpose is to sell their things. They will do anything to sell, and so they are willing to barter. Like, I remember just walking past one, and the guy's like, hey, it's like, would you like one of these? It's like, because you are so pretty, I will take off 10 euro. And I'm like, you know what? It was like a scarf. I actually did buy it because it was very pretty, but like like, because you are so pretty, I will take off 10. I was like, okay.
Okay.
I know it's like a whatever, but they do try to barter. Like, if they see you looking at something and you're like, they see you like thinking about it, they will just immediately.
Well, I would say that the word for that is more haggle. There must be a better word for it too. But
No, you're probably right.
so that is bartering, but also, okay, well, I guess what I had in mind that I should have been a bit more specific when I asked was bartering in terms of paying for something without cash. So trading. Maybe I should have said trading.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah. But in your case, Abby, you were paying in cash and in your pretty looks. So they both added up to the amount that the person was wanting. So anyone like traded for something? Magic cards, Pokemon.
Well, if we're gonna go with Pokemon cards,
Oh, there goes glass.
yeah. Back in my day.
Oh, it's so cute when you young people say that.
You know.
Yeah.
Traded, the collectible cards.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else like use like tradables?
Nope. Or
Sorry.
you can go ahead. I'll go next. It's fine.
Well, I was just gonna say that this is kind of funny, but sort of in this topic. My younger sister used to pay me in like things that I wanted to help write her papers for her. Like she wouldn't give me money, but she would be like, I don't want you to just give you money, but I'll like buy you this if you like help me write my paper.
Well, this
So
is
it's kind of an exchange of like a favor or like an act.
okay. Well, I want to put a pin in that, Shayla, and come back to that. I don't want to put off Xander for too long, but but what you made me think is a question I'm going to ask a little bit later is just what does it feel inappropriate to pay money for? Which is a question that we'll get to in a bit, because, you know, that's also something that's culturally decided. All right, Xander.
Okay. This is funny because this relates kind of to what Shayla just said, but I got my sister a bottle of wine once just to read one of my longer papers in one of my classes. One time I was just like, hey, could you proofread this for me? Here's a bottle of wine. So
You
yeah.
sound like you're accepting or giving bribes, but that's a method of exchange, so totally legit in this discussion. But I have the funniest story of all, which not really, but yeah. So my ex-husband got my wedding ring, he got the engagement ring by trading a rare video game for it. So, you know, that was true barter right there, which makes it so much better of a story. Oh, so him anyway. But
On the video game, how
huh?
rare? It depends on the video game.
Oh yeah, it was stadium events. It's very rare, so it was worth way more than the ring. So yeah, I mean, you know, what is an engagement ring worth? It's worth more than the ring, right? It's got symbolic capital and all that shit, but I'm just not really a bling person, you know, and blah 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 blah. Yeah. So moving along. Okay. But yes, the understanding that what you are giving and what you are getting is, at least at that moment, for the two parties involved, of equal value. Okay, so the relationship between commoditization and culture would be that these things are very much culturally decided. And that is something that you can talk about when you're talking about, like when the first Spaniards from the old world came to the new world and were looking for gold, and they saw natives wearing little bits and pieces of it as jewelry. And of course, for the natives, it was like, oh, this is pretty. We're just gonna wear bits and pieces of it for jewelry. And the Spaniards were like, we want all of your gold, take us to where it is. And the natives were like, we don't have any more. And then they all got killed. So that's a gross oversimplification, as you all know, but it's just like the first example off the top of my head of a total disconnect between ideas of what is valuable and what is not. You know, what are you going to make into a commodity? Also, things, again, that we may think are inappropriate to commodify, certain services and certain objects and people and parts of people and all that kind of stuff, might be acceptable in different ways in other cultures. So this has led to a lot of things going down in history, I'll just put it that way. And of course, in the Kopytov chapter, he talks about this a lot in terms of slavery, when people are the commodities. But if you look at it in the context of an object biography, those people may only be commodities at certain points in their lives, at which point they might turn into individuals, but then they have the potential to be recommodified again if they're going to be sold again at some point. And then, of course, he also brings up some other touchy subjects about the whole issues of abortion and fetuses and reproductive technologies and that kind of stuff, making commodities out of stuff that we as a whole society feel kind of uncomfortable making commodities out of. And so these are things that are culturally determined based on the moral economy, as he says, of our own specific cultures, which may have a lot in common with those of other cultures, or it may be different in certain key moments that we have to understand when you're dealing with exchanges. Anyone have anything to say on this topic? I don't want to move past like the uncomfortable parts or anything like that, because we'll bring them up later. But did that make sense to you, that these things are culturally determined? Can you think of any other kinds of examples?
Oh, I'm taking a sub-Saharan Africa with Dr. Lee right now. And we actually talked about the value of gold and how especially like Portugal ripped off certain parts of Africa because they traded in salt, which, to be fair, salt was a rare commodity in like northern or just Africa in general, I guess, but they still could have given them more from the amount of gold they were giving to us, if that makes sense, to like Europeans.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just colonialism 101.
I mean, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. But yeah, also there are a lot of cultures that have taken advantage of the fact that the cultures that they were dealing with didn't seem to commodify things or value things to the same degree. And so it's like, if you go to, okay, this is a really horrible analogy. I'm not saying that this is the same as what you just said, Xander, but like if you go to a garage sale and you see like the most, I don't know what you guys think is valuable, the most valuable Pokemon card or whatever, and the person who's selling it has no idea of its value and they're selling it for like a quarter, you know, do you just give them a quarter and then go home and like go all over social media saying, oh my God, I'm so savvy, look what I just did? Or do you tell the person, you can make a lot more money if you just take this to this game store right now or something like that, you know? So
the morality of Pokemon.
I know. Well, I don't know anything about Pokemon, so that's probably a horrible thing for me to try to use as an example.
Oh no, that's a good example. Same thing
It's
with
a
like
very good
Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
example.
Yeah, that's a great example
dominated.
actually.
At one point, it dominated like child's life and just taught early gambling.
This is something that I have noticed just from teaching this class a few times over the years, is that you all think in terms of Pokemon. And so I'm still kind of surprised that you still think in terms of Pokemon. So I don't know, what are you Z now, or are you millennials? Half and half, some of you. I don't know.
When it comes to me, the 1998 to like 2001 is a weird gap between millennial and Z. Like we have ideas from both.
Okay.
So we don't really belong to anywhere. We have our own generation.
Yeah, I'm in 1997, and it just feels awkward.
It feels awkward calling me a 90s kid when I really didn't live in the 90s.
I can't remember anything before like 2004, so was I even alive? Like,
yes.
It was a weird gap.
Okay. I couldn't remember
we're millennials,
when the millennials kind of shipped into the Z's.
Technically, we are millennials, but not really. We all know what we are.
Okay, because like my kid is a Z, but she's 9 years old, and so I don't think of her as like being in the same category as y'all. But I guess she's like on the other end. But, anyway, okay, so moving along. Okay, so another point that was brought up is called singularization by Kopitov, when he's talking about singular versus common as being on a spectrum. But it's also something that Danielle talks about too, when she's talking about uniqueness versus standardization. Because I'll get to that in a second. But so singularization is, what does it mean in the context of talking about material culture objects? Did anyone pick up on that, or was it confusing? Was it confusing? Or did you all like not get to the readings and only Abby was the one who was brave enough to tell me? Okay, so singularization is basically like with the red violin. When something is so singular, it's of singular notice, right? It's an individual. It's like the great man theory, but for objects, right? Where something is so highly not just valuable but unique that that intrinsically it's going to have different kinds of exchange processes and different kinds of use values and different kinds of symbolic values and all that kind of thing. And so basically it's the exact opposite of something that's just plain common. And so when you singularize something, you're putting it into kind of like a priceless category. So you could, like, for instance, you walk into a toy store, there's tons of stuffed animals on the shelf. You pick out one of them, you give it to your niece or nephew or whatever, and then it becomes their most beloved object. So that thing has been elevated from being a common stuffed animal, retail object, to something that is singular in the life of this person. At least to that person, it is priceless, right? It is achieved a status whereby it is worth far more than what you paid for it. And not only did you put money into it, but you put thought into it, you put love into the choice, and time into it. So you're putting a lot more into things that you're exchanging than just money. So yeah, and it sounds like you all have everyday objects that mean a lot to you because of their associations with beloved friends or family members, or with certain parts of your own life identities. And so you have elevated them above the status of the common and made them into singular objects, at least in the context of your life. Sometimes objects become singularized within the context of a whole culture when they are just that, like a Picasso painting. Those are singular items because of the status we give to this painter. And of course, that's based on a lot of things, but it's pretty much kind of accepted in our society that, oh, Picasso is a famous painter. Whether you like him or not, you have to recognize that his stuff has value. And did anyone go see the Picasso exhibit at the Frist? It's still up. It's cool. You saw it, Bae? All right, cool. I did too. It's good stuff. All right, so it's the opposite of being totally common. And it can be based, there are different scales, different frames of reference that determine whether something has become singularized or not. And of course, one thing that Kopytov says about complex societies, and he's speaking, you can tell that he speaks like as an anthropologist. He's done field work and this kind of stuff. And so he's totally using that kind of language. So when he says complex societies, he's, in a way, it's a bit of a value judgment, but it's also just kind of the language that anthropologists use when they talk about all the different parts of society. And of course, our society is complex compared to like a small tribe living in Africa that he was talking about, the one in Nigeria, the Tev Society. But so in our complex society, there's this drive to commodify everything as far as our technology will allow it. And by technology, we're talking about exchange technology. So we're talking about networks of distribution, we're talking about markets, we're talking about credit, We're talking about, people's whole income and economy and that kind of thing. And so the more advanced that is, the more actually you can commodify more things within a society. And so the backlash or the opposite to that would be ritualizing things to give them a status that they're protected from being tainted by this, economy of exchange, where we will say something is too special for that, or it's not appropriate to be in this kind of exchange. And so, for one thing, it explains the widespread use of money, because money is a technology and it allows for wider exchange because it's more standardized and that kind of thing. So culture works against commoditization by protecting certain objects through singularization. And that's our way of holding on to this idea that some things are priceless, some things are above that, some things are too special to do that to. And of course that, like I said before, is culturally determined. Now the word priceless, we tend to associate with things that are so valuable. But Kapitov also points out that sometimes there are things that have no value. Like, what do you say? Oh yeah, if I'm gonna light a match to light your cigarette, would I charge you for the match? No, because I've got like a box of 500 of them. It's beneath commoditization. So that's priceless because it has no price, because it is not worth a price. So priceless refers to things on both ends. But anyway, singularization refers to things on the one end, far from common. So it's determined by individuals, it's determined by societies, by different groups within societies, like certain religious groups will have things that they're going to ritualize and take out of this kind of exchange commodity, and certain other ones may not. Okay, so let's talk this question that was brought up earlier on the things that our culture refuses to put a price on. So let's say, so y'all don't know what grades you made on your essays yet, but if you gave me money, I'd give you all A's. Now, how many of you would take me up on that offer? Knowing I would never make this offer because I would be fired and it's unethical.
Depends on how much you're asking for.
But see, would it make you uncomfortable? Like, would you feel like you're participating in something unethical? Well, you should, although some of you might be a bit more
desperate.
I'll put a nice spin on it and say practical, and not say like devious and cunning and without morals. But yeah, so desperate. Yeah. Okay, that's also a nice yet pathetic ring to it. But yeah, so this idea of grades, we can't put a price on that, right? The price is what you all pay in terms of like tuition and your work and all that kind of stuff and your effort, right? But you can't put a price on that's not something that you can like exchange. You can only buy your grade through the work that you do on the assignments that's kind of contracted between you and me. What other things? Now, it's funny because Shayla and Xander both thought, well, it's inappropriate for me to pay this person or accept money from this person to do their homework, but I still recognize that this is an exchange of sorts, so I'm going to give them a gift instead. So it's funny because you guys did recognize that the giving of money, especially like, how many of you give your parents a $50 bill for their birthdays? That'd be weird. But if they give you a $50 bill for your birthday, that's awesome. So it's like, why are certain things weird?
It's where I felt like if I accepted money, that was cheating. Like there's a like it's there's proof right there, like you paid me to do a job.
But
But
you're
if
accepting something that was purchased with money.
yes, yeah, but it felt like less dirty, like
Ah,
more
ah.
acceptable, I guess.
So
It's like,
we
Yeah, like
assign different meanings to objects purchased with money as a plain out cash. Interesting. So what else do we refuse to put a price on? You know, obviously we should not, as a culture, sell people. You should not sell babies, but people pay a lot of money to adopt. And that money is compensation. It's not paying for a baby. It's paying for all the services that go around the exchange of the baby. And even the word exchange when talking about a baby is still kind of like, oh God, don't say that about a baby. But yeah. So what else do we refuse to put a price on? We should refuse to put a price on political favors. Or at least I'm in the camp that says that.
Mm-hmm.
Then lobbying is like the biggest. It's like the only way, like shit gets done in America.
Right, but is lobbying, how is that getting around the issue of, how is that not, okay, so lobbying is different from bribing flat out, because lobbying is, we are persuading them through the righteousness of our position on this issue.
I feel like lobbying is just really fancy bribing. I don't know about that
Well, it
one.
can't be
I don't know.
bribing unless there's an exchange of goods or services, right? Or flat out money. But so there's a lot of gray area there, and there's a lot of discomfort with the nature of those kinds of transactions, like what is considered to be above board and what is something that we need to reform. So there is a debate there. So what other kinds of things do we not put a price on?
We shouldn't put a price on access to clean water, but we do. I don't know. That's maybe a little bit political.
Yeah, I know. You
But
see, I didn't ask what should we refuse to put a price on, because
I
that
just can't think of anything else that we
my
don't.
soapbox is so high, y'all, I wouldn't be able to get down. So yeah, we refuse to put a price on, or do we, you know?
Seems like we put a price on everything. I'm having trouble thinking of something that we don't like put a price on, honestly. Other than the stuff we've already talked about.
Well, remember, the more complex the technology, the more complex the system of commoditization, and the more widespread you can make everything into a commodity, right? I mean, you could talk about sex work here. There's a drive for legalization of sex work, and there's a lot of opposition to that. So there's a lot of debate surrounding whether you can actually pay for that type of service and have it be ethical.
So I guess maybe like there's a difference culturally between like love and sex, where we don't put a price on love. But then I wanted to say that earlier, but like
Love.
it's, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, putting a price on love. Well, I mean, can't
It
buy me
happens
love, right?
indirectly though, like through like marriage
Gold
in a
diggers.
way.
Okay, well, this is a good thing to bring up. So, you know, bribes are bad. Public parks are off limits, supposedly, but not to drilling anyway. And dowries, yeah, dowries aren't a thing anymore. At least they're not really a thing anymore in our culture, but they used to be a thing, right? If you've ever watched a Jane Austen movie, I should have said read a Jane Austen book, but you know, if you've read the books, you've also seen the movies because they're just all good. But yeah, so this issue, but that's like, that's recognizing marriage though as a different type of relationship than just one based on love. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's beyond the scope of this conversation to say that you shouldn't be putting a price on love. But that's, yeah, that's, oh, I wouldn't even know what to say. I wouldn't even know how to come up with a really substantial question for y'all following that. But yeah, so let's, I mean, you don't go to a friend's house and, okay, let's say you invite a friend over after you've both been vaccinated, right? You invite a friend over and you watch a movie together, but it's one of those movies that you have to pay $3.99 for to rent from Amazon, you know? And do you make your friend give you $2 to cover half the rental? Or if you give your friend a ride home, do you make them give you money for gas? Sometimes you might. That's legit. If you have to drive them all the way to the airport, you know, maybe you would accept some money for gas, especially if you're, you know, a student who has no money. I've been there before. But like, you know, if somebody comes and stays with you over the weekend, do you charge them for it? You know, like, well, this is what I saw as comparable on Airbnb, so why don't you pony up? Like, you know, think about other things that if somebody asked you for money for, you'd balk at, you know? So this idea of things that you do as like friendship or favors, because the idea is that, you know, personal relationships are based on different types of exchange, where the exchange is in your actions and your loyalty and those kinds of things, and not based on commodifying those things. So yeah, I'm getting really abstract here, but you know, I can see that you're all thinking about this. So I'm going to just believe in my heart that you're going to continue to think about this and go about your daily lives, and things will come up and be like, oh my God, that would be totally weird if I had to pay money for this right now. You know, like, why don't I ask my 9-year-old to kick in her share of the mortgage? Dude, because I'm financially responsible, whatever. But and because I just stole half of her stimulus check, so there we go. So yeah, there's a lot of things that once you start thinking about it, you'll notice, like, what would it take to commodify? What would it kind of make something be not so cool if money were involved in that transaction, on large scale as well as small personal scale? All right. So let's talk about the life cycle model a bit. This was what was kind of covered in the Karen Danielle chapter from the Karen Harvey edited book. And so we got to talk about how it's different from an object biography. And actually, I understand this better and better the more that I read this chapter. So if this is still confusing to you, then that's all right, because I was there once too. But does anyone want to take a stab at this?
I feel like the life cycle model focuses more on the beginning and end, like the how it was made more almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the life cycle model is something that is used a lot in terms of like industry studies when they're talking about, and again, here's where the production, distribution, consumption stages come in a lot. because those are the major cycles in the life of an object. Yeah. Anyone want to add to that? Now, she does say that both of these approaches used in tandem are good. So a combined approach is probably the most fruitful for material culture analysis. You know, they both actually are supposed to be covering from the beginning to the end, right? If something has come to an end yet, which when it comes to objects, it's a little bit harder to say when the end of it is, especially objects that become museum pieces or are still in your house or whatever like that. But you know, biographies is more kind of like, you know, like the biography of a person, where you're focusing on a specific object through its life. Whereas the life cycle model is looking at things more in general. So it's more about a type of a material culture object as opposed to a specific object. So in other words, the life cycle model of you know, like this mug, which is my favorite piece of material culture on the desk. The life cycle model would talk about this as a mug. So it'd be like, okay, it was produced in this all right. So it was made in China, and I could tell you the company, and then well, it's in both English and French, so that tells me that this is sold in both the United States and Canada, because Canada has to have both on there. And you know, I could talk about when these were produced and why this design was chosen. I actually have a matching kitchen towel. And I remember where I bought it. Oh, that store on the square, Country Gourmet. That's where I bought it. And then it enters into the life of being my mug, but I could still talk about it in general terms, like, okay, it's used to drink hot beverages, and it's used at home and at the office, and it's washed when it gets dirty, and it's durable, and at one point it'll probably break, or get really, really cruddy and nasty, at which point it'll be thrown away and replaced. And so that's me saying that my mug is probably experiencing a very similar life to all the other mugs that came out of the same production line. So let's look at a couple other case studies then. But you can see why life cycle models are really good for industry studies, because
You still in class.
Yep.
oh, okay. Like, what? That wasn't one of you. Okay. Because they want to be able to project and see how these things are used by a lot of people, and that's where you get like focus groups and surveys and that kind of stuff. They take like an aggregate, and so they could talk about kind of like general trends and uses and that kind of thing. So for example, here's the fork and the knife from your syllabus, the picture on your syllabus. And so the chapter that you read from the Petrosky book about how the fork got its tines is not talking about this specific fork. It's talking about forks in general through the time period that this fork also represents. So if you want to talk about the object biography, you'd have to go to the page on the British Museum's website where this is housed and look at its specific metadata, like you did for the chronometer, right? And you could learn about this specific, like, okay, where was this one specifically made? When would it have been sold? Where was it when it was accessioned into the British Museum? Who was the last private owner? Like that kind of thing. You could probably find out prices and that kind of thing. But so there's a difference between taking this as this fork and knife set versus forks and knives from this time period and how they evolved over time. So that's kind of a general rule of thumb for explaining the difference between the life cycle model. Because just the word model makes it a bit more generic, right? Versus object biography, which is more individualized. Okay. So
well, I just want to say something the articles made me think of that they didn't address because, I mean, for obvious reasons, but like recycled things, would it end once it becomes recycled into another object, or would it start a new, like, you know what I mean? Like, would it start a new cycle of
yeah, the afterlife of an object. So that's, I guess, if you want to consider whether or not your idea of the object is inherent in the materials of the object, or whether you think that the object is its form, in which case, if the form is completely different, then that marks the end of that. But as far as the materials are concerned, it's going to move on. So I guess you could do it either way, but you'd have to be very clear about what it is that you're considering the object to be in its essence. So, the essence of an object is kind of in the eye of a beholder, but then there are like general statements that you can make about the essence of, like if this fork was melted down, like if the enamel handle was taken off and the fork, the metal was melted down as scrap, it would cease to be a fork. Will we consider the next item it was molded into to be a new phase of its life? Maybe that seems weird for the fork example, but maybe it would seem like it would make more sense with a different kind of thing. Like if you're, like people who take things like a wheelbarrow and turn them into a planter in their front yard. I mean, it's no longer a wheelbarrow, but it still looks like one. So I guess the question is, how much of its original essence does it retain? And that seems to me to be a little bit ambiguous. So we're kind of busting through pretty quickly. So I only have like a couple more slides. If you wanted, we could go through those now and we could be out of here in like 20 minutes instead of taking a break now. Would everyone be up for that?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. I feel a lot less guilty about cutting class short when we're on Zoom, partly because it's hard and painful to stay on Zoom for longer than an hour and 20 minutes and or an hour and a half, and partly because I didn't drag you all to campus today, although some of you I'm sure had to come for other reasons. Because I have a case study, and it's supposed to bring together a lot of the things that we've talked about. And so, yeah, I guess I'll do that right now. Okay, so my case study is a car. Let's talk about this car.
My mom had a car like that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
What color was it?
It was baby blue.
Oh, nice.
Not her choice. It's my grandfather's choice.
Yes, because it would have been your grandfather. Yeah. So this is a type of car called a Chevrolet Caprice.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that this is a coupe. Coupe means it has 2 doors. Sedan means it has 4 doors. So this is a coupe. And it has other specific characteristics. So if we're going to talk about the life cycle of the Chevrolet Caprice, then here's a good place to actually see examples of the life cycle model. Yep, I'm gonna do this. I'm going to okay, we're gonna go to Wikipedia. Y'all see Wikipedia right now?
Yep.
Okay. Wikipedia is a good place to show you, like, this is the life cycle model for the Chevrolet Caprice. Because when I'm saying the Chevrolet Caprice here, I'm talking about any Chevrolet Caprice, right? It's a specific make and model, but it's not a specific car, right? I mean, I guess it is depending. Some people might say a specific car and talk about all the cars of this type that were ever produced. But it's not like one car, right? There we go. So this whole entry here tells you about, you know, the production. Of course, this is produced by Chevrolet, General Motors in Detroit, Michigan, between 1965 and 1996. This tells you a lot of details about its production. And then when you think about distribution, what would be distribution for a car? Where are cars produced? They're produced at the car factory, right? Which used to be in the United States. And then they go where? Where do cars go after that?
Lots people basically sell them. They're like middlemen basically before
Yeah.
the
You're not
buyers.
gonna go to General Motors and be like, I want to buy a car. They'll be like, go to the dealership. So yeah, middlemen, you buy a car from middlemen, and that can be lots of different types of dealerships. It could be the dealership specifically associated with Chevrolet. It could be a dealership that's just like a privately owned dealership that deals with, you know, different kinds of makes and models. And or, you know, you could buy it secondhand or even third hand or that type of thing. So the distribution has to do with these things being transported from the place where they were produced, from the factory. And a lot of times these things might go to another place to get like secondary finishings and that kind of stuff. And then they would end up in distribution centers, which would be like dealerships. And the networks that make them go to certain dealerships all have to do with different deals and all sorts of complex kinds of negotiations and stuff like that. And so there's a price, you know, that's already like one, like a price on the vehicle because the dealerships pay for these things. And then, but they don't expect to keep them. So the purpose of the vehicle at a dealership is something to be sold, right? It's retail wares. It's a display item. It's a lifestyle suggestion. It's all these things. That's it. That's how it's being used. It's not used to be driven yet. It's used to attract car buyers. So its intended use has not quite been fully actualized yet. It's not quite there yet. And then consumption, of course, being the last major stage of the life cycle, where how do you consume a car? You buy it, you drive it, you use it. I know that a lot of people use their cars for so many things other than mere transportation. They might be a closet. They might be a carpool. They might be, if you're an Uber driver, your car might be your office. It might be a place where you hang out with friends. You know, it could be sometimes, I know people who have lived out of their cars for certain periods in their lives. And that always breaks my heart to hear that, but at least they had a car. Oh, hello, Elise. So there are lots of different ways to consume a car, but the intended use of a car is to be driven. And I imagine that all of you who have a car, no matter what else you do to it, you also drive it. So I think a car is one of those things where the intended use is the actual use as well. So, and of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but yes. So you can also see, as far as like the coupe goes, there's like more specific, we're getting more specific here. So the one that I showed you, those two pictures, so this was, by the way, you could talk more about the Chevy Caprice because it was a super popular car, one of the best-selling cars in America in the 60s and the 70s. If you want to elaborate on the context of this car in American society, which I think I wrote that on most of your essays, elaborate on the context of this in American society or something similar to that, because I want you to get in the habit of really delving into that. So you could talk about how big cars were like, you know, the symbol of American prosperity in the post-war years. You could talk about American manufacturing dominance. You could talk about different sorts of trade and geopolitics in terms of where all the materials come from. Now, this car, up until a certain point, the body was stainless steel. It was steel bodied. It was a very substantial car. But where did all that come from? You know, and then you talk about, well, the steel production and, you know, what we now call the Rust Belt. And you could talk about the style and aesthetic preferences. You could also talk about cheap oil and gas, at least up to the mid 70s, right? That allow for such large, heavy vehicles to be a middle-class commodity item where they could afford to both buy it and to drive it. And so you could talk about the influence of the car industry in American politics and in the way that it employed and continues to employ so many people. And it's, you know, the car industry is so central to our identity as American manufacturing society that we had to bail out all the auto industries in 2008. So, you know, there's a lot of different things that you could bring in to talk about that all contributes to why this car is the way that it is and the significance that it has in American society. And of course, this particular model being very, very popular, so much so that the sedan version was used as a cop car up until like the early 90s. So if you've ever watched like the Dukes of Hazzard, I don't know, do they still let that be on? I loved that show when I was a kid. But so the cop car is a Chevy Caprice sedan, you know, Roscoe P. Coltrane. Okay, so so yeah, you could talk about that. You could talk about you know, the development of hot rod societies and stuff like that. I like cars, so I would talk about all that. But this specific one that I showed you, the two-door one, from a specific window in time, so you can see there's a lot of different phases in terms of the way that this style evolves, the way that the fork evolves, you know. Okay, yeah, I see that. And so, okay, if you can see this down here, you have this back windshield during 1977 to 1979 on the two-door model. You have this beveled fishbowl rear window where you can see it's bent. And so it's like a three-sided window. And so that's actually pretty rare because most of the Chevy Caprices that are still out there on the roads are four-door. So the two-door model with this specific kind of rear window is pretty rare and pretty cool. I'm sorry, that was a value judgment that was completely based on my own opinion. So I have to admit that. Okay, so yes, so this is an example of life cycle model, and very detailed in terms of description. Don't forget to include as many details as you can in your description of things. There wasn't enough of that, I noticed, in your papers. You can see up here on the right, this is what they look like in the 21st century, because we have different ideas about size and shape and miles per gallon than we did in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint. So I think you know where I'm going from here. I'm going to show you an object biography. Okay, so I think you can guess that I had one of these cars. And this is my car. Well, it's not mine anymore, but that's part of its object biography. So if I were to talk about the object biography of this car, I would say this was built in 1979. It is, you know, a two-door coupe version that has that beveled back windshield. This was originally purchased by a General Motors employee whose name, you know, I have the paperwork, but I can't find it because it's in like all of my dad's stuff. But his name was Ollie. He was some Swedish guy that my dad said had a really outgoing personality and was really funny. Anyway, so from 1979 to 1980, this was owned by a guy named Ollie who worked at General Motors, and he drove it around quite a bit. And so my father, who worked at General Motors at the time, this is how I know a lot about cars. So he bought this car from Ollie for his parents who were looking for a new car, and they lived in West Virginia. So my dad bought this car in 1980 off of him, and he drove it down to West Virginia to give to his parents. And shortly after that, his father died, and his mother didn't drive very much because she lived in a little town in West Virginia and didn't really go anywhere. So it just kind of sat there, being very rarely driven for a long time. So this is like 1980. And I can't tell you a lot about what happened during its life at that time, but I do have one picture. This would have been, I guess this would have been in 1980 when this would have been when he was bringing it to West Virginia. That's my sister. That's not me. But that's my older sister. So yeah. So there she is. And of course, I couldn't find it, but my dad recreated this picture many, many years later, and I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it. So this is what the car looked like at that time. And so between 1980 and 2001, this car lived in West Virginia and was really only driven to like the grocery store and back. A couple times my uncles borrowed it and took it to North Carolina or the beach or something. And so by the time 2001 rolls around, this 1979 car only had like 60,000 miles on it. And so it comes to me, and I'm living in California, in Los Angeles, and the car that I have is dying, and I need a new car. And I was really worried to take on such a gigantic car, because if you've ever tried to park in a parking lot in Los Angeles, you know that 90% of the parking spots are compact. And if you've ever had a two-door car before, you know that the doors are longer than they are on a four-door car. So you take a long car that already has long doors and you park it in a compact spot, you pretty much have to be very careful not to ding every car that you're around. So this car comes to me in 2001. So this is a new phase of its life. And I christen it Lomax. I named it Lomax. And so it becomes, it's a family car, but now it's really a family car. In fact, y'all already think I'm weird, so this isn't going to sound too weird, but this car is the car love of my life, you know? How sometimes you love a car more than people. So this was it. But by that time, of course, it looked like this. So I do not know what happened to it that caused it to go from being tritone to being this just simple gray vehicle. But yeah, so this car and I have a lot of fun in Los Angeles for several years. And I don't know if you recognize where it is right now, but this is my car at Yosemite. And that's Angel Falls in the background. And so this car got up to 9,000 feet above sea level. And considering, you know, in the early aughts, the price of gas and the fact that this car only gets like 16 miles a gallon at best, it's, yeah, it was kind of hard. And the air conditioning wasn't working anymore. And so these are the types of details you would tell in an object biography. I'm not just like boring you with all these weird things from this time in my life, because it does serve a point. But yes, the air conditioning was not working. And when you live in Southern California and you drive home on I-40 across the country to Tennessee in the summertime with no air conditioning, it's really, really hot. And so there's all sorts of stories about that. And this car, I mean, one of the things about the back window being the way it is if you sit in the back seat, and let's say you put the back of your head where that bar comes down, and you're looking out and you're using your peripheral vision, you pretty much have a panoramic view. And so there are like almost no blind spots in this car. Whenever I would get into like a rental car or my mother's car or something, I'd be like, I can't see anything, because for some reason, like back windshields have gotten shorter and there's just so much non-window stuff around, and it's hard to get used to that when you're used to panorama. I can see everything. Also, the fact that this car is very long means you have to be very cognizant of when you're parallel parking. But also the fact that it's made of steel means that I had a friend who had a 4-door version of this, and he got into a wreck and his car was accordioned, but of course he was fine because there's so much car protecting you that you will be fine. So obviously it depends, obviously, don't take my word for that. But yes, and so yes, and then this car brings me and my then boyfriend, soon to be husband, to Tennessee, and then it sits on the driveway for a long time because it won't fit in the garage. Because to pull a car like this into a garage in a modern house, you have to have like nothing else in the garage, which how many of you have a perfectly empty garage? That doesn't happen. So, okay. So yes, and then things fall apart. The interior starts to disintegrate. I don't have money. Blah, 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 blah. I get another car. I inherit another car off of a family member for commuting, because 16 miles a gallon, it's not a commuting car. So I get a Honda for commuting. And so this basically sits on the driveway long enough that the battery constantly needs rejumping. And so unfortunately, that part of its life is really sad. And so, yes, I am telling you this long object bio so you can hear what one sounds like. So, and then I have a baby, and a soft bench seat with lap belts only does not hold a car seat very securely. And the one time I tried to strap my car seat of my child into the back seat, I looked back there once and she was at a 45-degree angle. So I was like, okay, need a different car. And but my attachment, I had made this into a singularity, right? I could not think of this as something to be sold because it was a member of the family, which is always dangerous to do to objects, right? Even though I always got offers, I'd pull up to a gas station and people would like just offer me $4,000 for it on the spot because I guess it looks like it'd make a great pimp mobile. So I didn't know how to get rid of it. I felt really, really guilty about it. In the end, lots of stuff happened, but it turned out that my husband ended up buying it for $2,000 and I couldn't accept the money. So I gave the money to my dad to use to restore his Camaro. So that's the thing. Like I felt like money could not enter into that transaction because it's like, if you had a pet that you had in your family and you had to give it to a better home, would you accept money for it? I mean, sometimes I know people do buy animals still, but there's a big movement against that. And people think it's morally better to adopt animals instead of buying them. So I guess it was that kind of thing for me. So yeah. But luckily, my now ex-husband, but still good friend and co-parent, had money. And so one of the things that he did was to sign up for an antique auto license, where if your car is 25 years old or older, you can get a special license, but you can only drive it on the weekends. So now it has entered a new phase of its life where it's an antique auto. And it is also being completely regutted in the interior and redone in the exterior. So this is what it looks like today. It's still being reworked on the inside because, like I said, all of the upholstery inside just had disintegrated. Because the windows are great to look out of, but they also let the sun in, so the interior had been baking. So yeah, that's being redone by a really cool dude who has his little car shop in Smyrna, and just is been working on this nonstop for a very long time. And so when this car is done, I get to drive it again. That's the best part. Because I thought when I was selling it that I was never going to see it again. So I took a bunch of pictures and I couldn't find them because of course it was an older phone and technology, blah, blah, blah. It's not on my computer anywhere. I did take a video of my last drive in Lomax. It's a very long video. My dad was with me and my child was in the back seat. It was very unsafe, but whatever. So now the car has that added layer onto it where it reminds me of my father because he was so involved in this car's life. And he was always the person that I asked whenever anything went wrong because he was the car guy and he could always help me with it. And he has passed away. So now I can't even watch that video anymore because I get too emotional. And, I just have to hope that he would appreciate it when it's going to be all fixed up and that kind of thing. So it has so many different layers on this. And I know that some of you with objects that are associated with special people in your family will totally understand that it is not, when was the last time it was just a car? Like maybe to my grandmother, but that had been quite a while. So this car has been a commodity at different points in his life. It's been a consumer item, but it's been a member of the family. And then it's also a collector's item being an antique auto as it is and being restored right now. So that is my case study, because cars make really good case studies, because you can say so much about life cycle as well as object bio, because we all have individual relationships with a specific car, but we all also understand the utilitarian value of cars and resale value and that kind of thing. So those of you who are a bit closer to your cars might understand this story a bit better than those of you for whom it's just a utilitarian object. And I applaud you if you're able to strip away the emotions from your relationship with your car. And I hope that you appreciate your car in a new way the next time you drive it. But yes, that's even me leaving out a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, how many times do you take pictures of your car? I wish it had taken a lot more, because now I'm like, usually when you're somewhere, you're like, well, I got to take a picture of this and make sure the car's not in it. And now I'm like, damn, I wish I had taken more pictures of my car in places. Okay, so that's enough about Lomax.
I have a question.
Yes.
Was your car named after Alan Lomax?
Alan Lomax? Yes, it was.
I love that.
Yeah. Because in the early aughts, for those of you who don't know who Alan Lomax is, he was an ethnomusicologist who worked for the Library of Congress, and he would record across the country and across the world, actually, folk recordings for the Archive of American Folk Song for the Library of Congress. And his father did the same thing, and his father was one of the people credited with discovering, which of course is, you shouldn't say that when a white man records a black man, but he discovered lead belly, and led to a lot of early Smithsonian Folkways recordings, and also other kinds of things. But yeah, Alan Lomax, they recorded a lot of cowboy songs, yeah, so much stuff. So yeah, the music that I listened to in this car was a very big part of my relationship to the car. Yes. Okay, so yeah, sorry that got so personal there, but basically that's kind of the point, though, of an object biography, is that the biography is the object is treated as an individual with a life of its own, and of course, like doing a biography on a person, it has relationships with other people, and so this car definitely had relationships with people, and that's part of its object biography. And luckily its story is not over yet. And so we can't really talk about the death of the object yet. Although, man, my old Honda got killed totally. But yeah, I like to think that this car will be around long after I'm gone. So, which is kind of horrible to think about a consumer object, because unfortunately all the stuff that we produce will still be around after we're gone, because we've just cluttered up the planet with it. But yeah, anyone else name their cars?
Mine's named Lomax.
Yours is also named Lomax?
Yeah, and I have
Oh, wow.
Lomax Paramount recording posters in my apartment, like all throughout.
Oh yeah, awesome. Oh my God, that's so funny.
That's why I was wondering. I was like, wait.
Well, I remember like the whole debate around naming the car, which I guess most of you don't relate to other than me and Elise. But because my friends were like, this feels like a girl car. You need to call it Betty or Betsy or something like that. And I was like, no, this car is my boyfriend. It's definitely got a male vibe to me. And because it's also like a muscle car, and I would drive down Sunset Boulevard listening to Social Distortion and stuff. So it's like, nah, this car is my boyfriend. So yeah, I have two cars now. One I just like put in a feminine gender category, and one I put in a masculine gender category. I don't know why I do this, but the fact that I unfortunately anthropomorphize so many material cultural objects actually makes me very sensitive to teaching this as a subject. So good things come out of bad things. Nobody else names their car?
Well, I didn't get to name it. It was my grandmother's car before it was mine, and she named it Coldplay. So
wait, like the band Coldplay?
Yeah.
Your grandmother named it Coldplay?
Yes.
Does your grandmother listen to Coldplay? I am not that old. Like, seriously.
Yes.
Oh, that's a Clifford the Big Red Truck. I feel like you told me about that before. That's hilarious.
To make you feel better, my little brother, who's 13, loves Coldplay, and all his little buddies do. So they're not like an
I
old
don't love
band.
Coldplay. It's just I didn't think that they were old enough to be like grandma.
My grandmother has a wide variety of favorite
That's
music.
awesome. Go grandma. That's great.
Like at one moment we're listening to Coldplay, and then the next we're listening to Diana Ross. Like
That
it's
sounds great to me. Good for her.
Sounds like a cool grandma.
yep, she's pretty cool. But yeah, I got her car because my previous car got killed by a deer, and so
Usually it's the other way around, but yes, deers do a lot of damage.
Well, I hit one. The only deer I ever hit was it got up immediately and just like looked at me
The
and walked
only deer I
away.
ever hit. Like you're expecting to hit like so many acres.
I know that sounds weird, but yeah, my sister was in the car and it was hilarious because it just got up afterwards and walked away.
Yes.
terrifying is what it is.
But you see how cars are really good to talk about in terms of object bios because they do kind of go from owner to owner. Like usually it's not just like one owner from beginning to end. Well, I guess not in my poor person world. Did you have your hand up? No? Nobody had their hand up?
Who?
Okay, I thought somebody had a hand up. Okay, well, all right, so yeah, basically, I think you get the point of the differences and the whole issue around commodification. But also, I have to say, giving a personality to your car, naming your car, and being in love with your car are, I think, very distinctly American things. I know that younger generations are less attached to their cars because you'd rather have public transportation. I would too, but yeah, because I heard that being attached to your car was something that people are not really doing anymore. So I think it may be kind of a late 20th century kind of thing more so. And that's a good thing. You know, we need to move away from these.
It's definitely a uniquely American thing. My boyfriend is from Israel, and he was driving my car a few weeks ago, and I drive a Forester, a Subaru.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I think is weird is that like people will tell you, like they'll make jokes like, "Oh, you're driving a lesbian car," because it's a Subaru, and he had never heard that before. So when he got back to his apartment, he was like, "Elise, someone just called me a lesbian." And then he was like asking me about it, and I was like, "Yeah, dude, that's like completely normal here." And he said that all of his friends have Subarus in Israel, and it's not common, and that's not even like anything they associate it with.
Okay, yeah, one of my cars is a Subaru Outback, and it does tend to be like associated with like NPR listeners. I didn't realize it's associated with being a lesbian, but I mean, hey, whatever, that doesn't offend me.
My car has a great personality because
personality, there's a word person in that word, but cars have it.
the technical side of it is that the air compressor is broken with the door that changes from heat to cold, and so it like hits the gear and makes this ticking sound, and I find it so annoying. But like I think my car does it out of spite because sometimes it won't do it. Like I'm expecting it, and I'm like, oh, it fixed itself, and then like 5 minutes later I'll start doing it. I'm like, I hate you. Like
yeah, cars have quirks, certainly. Yep. All right. Okay, well, in that case, unless anyone else has any other kind of similar stories to tell, we will go ahead and we'll close for today. I told you I'd let you out early. And I'm going to post this like I'll email you all when the recording is available on it'll be an unlisted link on YouTube. It'll be in a special unlisted playlist on the YouTube channel like the last one was. And you'll get another email that'll be like a class-wide email. Then you'll get an individual email from me with your essays to be returned before the end of this week. And so what is your job for next week for this class?
Discussion posts.
Yes, which will be up before the end of the week. What else?
I didn't know there was something else.
There's readings, right? One
Yes.
for next week.
You have to read an well, it's not an article, it's technically a chapter from a book. One, just one, and you have to do your discussion post based on that. And we will be talking about that next Wednesday. Where?
In class, yeah, right.
Yes, in Peck Hall. Like I'm pretty sure that's what Behi said, even though he's on mute. I'm not very good at reading lips, but that's Peck Hall, right? Okay. So yeah, anyone who has any questions can just hang on. Anyone else can pop off, and I'll see you guys next week.
Okay.
Yes.
I know you probably don't want to say